Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters, and welcome to my weekly live chat. If you have watched or participated in the last couple weeks of live chats, you'll notice I'm back in the studio. That's right, I've been out of town pretty much all summer and was doing lives from basement rooms, from anywhere I could, but I'm excited to actually be home and back in my studio. I wasn't here last week, but glad to be back today and kind of getting right back into the schedule. Now that school's getting ready to start, I kind of get back into my routine and kind of looking forward to it, even though I had a ton of fun. So normally during a live chat, I share some kind of tutorial or some kind of tips, or I have pictures and put together a little presentation. And today I don't have that. So what we're going to do is an Ask Me Anything. So this is kind of fun because you just never know what y'all are going to ask. I actually have already written down a ton of questions from before I went live. So if you're ever available, I go on the type chat or on the video and we kind of chat about half an hour before I go live, and tons of great questions. So I'm definitely going to answer those. Now, the reason I don't really have any presentations or anything for you is I'm cooking up something for you guys, or something, a lot of new stuff coming up. So I can't wait to get to tell you about that. So next couple weeks, I might have a fun announcement. Also, our Build a Quilt Block of the Month program is wrapping up this year and getting ready to start up. So just a lot of things going on. So even though it's kind of a lull right now, definitely a lot of great things coming up. So again, today I'm going to answer questions, the Ask Me Anything kind of thing. But, if I don't answer your question, leave it in the comments, because from time to time I get back on YouTube and answer them. Just a lot of fun there. Real quick, the last video that I had come out a couple weeks ago finished up our recent Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series. And it was a quick video on quilting design ideas for the optional border panel. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, no worries. I have a free video series I call the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, and that kind of wrapped it up. But even though that's over, which is always, every time I finish up that video series, it's like the end of a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of bittersweet because it's like, oh, it's over. But then I'm also like, it's over. But even if you weren't able to do that at the time, all of my videos stay on my YouTube channel and my website. So you can definitely partake of those as it hits your convenience. So excited about that. All right. Again, next week I'll be back with more tutorial stuff, but here I'll just answer some questions. So again, I kind of just took some questions, wrote them down real quick, and I said, you guys can ask me anything. It doesn't even have to be quilting related. And Patty came out right out the gate and was like, who's your favorite student? I was like, dang, good job, Patty. That was like, good one. Of course, everybody's my favorite student. I love teaching. I will say I love when that light bulb moment comes on. I try to make the video tutorials and the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along kind of like a class. That's why we have this live chat and all that. But I miss getting to see everybody's face and see like that light bulb moment when it clicks. Usually there's not a whole lot of crying in my class. I can usually talk people down pretty easy. So everybody's my favorite student. Or favorite student. All right, Teresa asked, how many kids do I have in college? Well, thankfully for my checkbook, we only have one in college. So Drake, my oldest, is 22, which is just crazy because I feel like I'm only 22, so I'm not sure how that happens. But he just purchased a house and he's getting ready to move out, so that's kind of, again, bittersweet. Chloe, my middle, is in college. So she goes to school about 3 hours south from here, and she is in her second, or getting ready to start her third year, living her best life. I'm pretty sure that college is kind of like a halfway house for adulthood, right? Like you get all the freedom of being an adult, but not all the bills to pay. So I think she's having a great time with it. And then my baby girl is 16 and is starting high school, or going to be a junior starting school. So very exciting. It's crazy. Babies just grow up, but I don't feel any older. All right, Emma asked a question about piecing, which I love answering questions about piecing, but y'all need to know something. I am not a great piecer. Joni, who does our Build a Quilt, can tell you I'm more of like a, just kind of get her done kind of thing. Probably because I know I can fix some of the stuff with the quilting. But Emma asked, do I ever cut the blocks down to trim them? Like maybe I didn't piece them right. I'm assuming that's what she meant. And yes, I have been known to do the stretchy stretch, the smush and push, like the trying to finagle it to get it in place. That's why I like quilting on the panels, because I don't have to piece it. But I have done that, yes, and I am definitely not the best piecer. I like to joke I'm actually the worst piecer that I quilt for, so there is that. All right, another question about batting. How do I keep my quilt soft even when it's quilted to death? Now, if you have seen any of my quilting, watch any of my videos, I love to quilt it till it's dead and then put some more on it. But I know that some people don't like that stiff kind of feeling. If that's the case, I think using a natural fiber batting, like cotton or wool or silk, will give you that nice drape, even though there's a lot of quilting. And I have a sample, not here obviously, but that I take to my trunk shows or classes that you can feel. This thing is quilted to death, but it's that natural fiber batting and it has that nice drape to it. And plus, the more you use the quilt, the softer it'll get, the more it'll kind of get broken in. I love to tell a story, and I've probably already told it, but I gave Drake a quilt when he was younger, and he wanted it to be soft like the one that's on our bed. Well, the one on our bed has been on there forever. And I said, well, it'll soften up as you use it. And then I came upstairs a couple days later, and he had thrown it in the washer with about a half a jug of fabric softener, trying to soften it up. And I'm like, you can't cheat the process. So go ahead and quilt it to death, use that natural fiber batting, and then trust that it will get softer as you go. This was an interesting question. What am I thinking about when I'm designing a fabric collection? Sometimes when I think about the fact that I design fabric, it kind of blows my mind because, I started quilting. I didn't go to design school or art school or anything like that. And it's just kind of crazy that I do it. And I think it just shows that the more you do something, the better you get at it. The process of designing a fabric collection is very organic. I hate to use that word, but there's not like a straight line. I don't have like a set thing. I usually, though, I have some kind of idea. I start playing with the patterns and the colors. About 3 times out of the whole process, I have a whole like breakdown moment where I'm like, this sucks, everything's horrible, and I hate everything. And then at the last minute, it seems to come together. I think that's just kind of natural with the creative process. But I did grab a couple fat quarters to kind of show you. I usually start with some kind of focal print, so something that has a lot going on. This is going to be like the main kind of thing that holds everything together. The reason I start with it is because then I can kind of pull from that. Not all the time does it work that way, but sometimes. And then I like to have a couple like multicolor prints. So a couple prints that pull out some of the colors that are in the main print. So 2 or 3 color prints, just something to add that color. And then I get to my favorite part, which are the blenders. The ones that just are pretty basic, just nice and simple, but they're the ones that kind of show off the color of the prints. So working through all that, and then usually like eventually it comes together. It's funny because I think everybody's process is different. So if you asked any fabric designer like Tula or anybody else, they have a different way of going about it. It's kind of fun to think about that. So great question. All right, another good question. So Sally asked, how do I pick a long arm quilting machine? How much throat space do I need? So it's kind of the process or the evolution of a quilter. Sometimes if you love machine quilting and you're kind of tired of quilting on your sewing machine, sometimes some people take that investment, take it to the next step and invest in a long arm quilting machine. Picking one out is tricky. It's like buying a car. That's the best analogy I use. Now, we are handy quilter dealers, so I sell handy quilter long arms. I use a handy quilter. I've used one for a long, long time, so just know that I'm kind of partial to that. But I think the most important thing to do is to consider how much can you afford and how much space do you have, and then get whatever will fit that. Because you can spend anywhere from $6,000 and all the way up. So when I'm talking about like throat space, sometimes, and this is just my opinion, sometimes I think people think the more is the better, right? The more throat space they have. And that might be the case if you're gonna get a computerized component to your long arm. If you have that big throat space, then you can get a lot more quilting done and be more efficient. But when it comes to free motion quilting, your control on that long arm is kind of right here. It's not all the way out there, all the way back here. So the joke I like to make in my classes or my long arm boot camps is you may have paid for the whole throat space, you don't have to use it though. So the machine I work on has an 18-inch throat space, which is kind of like the mid-range, maybe mid to smaller. It definitely changes the way I approach it, but that's the size I've always used, and so I like it. If you are just going to free motion and you're not going to computerize, I would say, in my opinion, 18 to 20, 22 inches is perfect. You don't need all of that unless you're going to computerize quilt. The best thing to do is to get your hands on one, because not only are you making this investment, but if you haven't used a long arm, you might not know if you even like it. So take a long arm class. And I know if you're like thinking, I don't know how to long arm, why would I go into a class? It's totally fine. You don't have to know how to use the machine to take the class. So take a class, try a machine, go to a show, check out your dealer and see what they offer. We sell all over the US, so it's like just kind of deciding what you want with it. But the problem is everybody is different, so you just kind of have to be aware of what your preference is and what your situation is. But like I said, it's kind of like a car, just finding those features that fit you in the budget that you have. So, but I will say, long arming is so fun. There's just something about like freeing and moving really fast. I love putting on my headphones, listening to my music, and just quilting my heart out. And that's really where I became like enthralled with machine quilting. And then another question, Sally also asked, she has an older long arm without a stitch regulator. And so like a new machine sounds interesting, a new long arm sounds interesting, but she's kind of worried that she won't be able to work in manual. That's exactly the situation I was in when I started long arming. My first machine was used. Drake was 6 months old. And you could add a stitch regulator on after the fact for $3,000. And I'd already talked my husband out of the money to buy the long arm. There's no way he was going to do that. So I learned without the stitch regulator, and I still use it in manual to this day. I never use a stitch regulator because that's how I learned. The good thing is you can adjust those modes. So even on a new machine, you can turn off the stitch regulator and you can quilt in manual if you so wish to. So don't let that scare you away from getting a new machine. Okay, great question. I love when people ask questions and then other people answer it. So BJ said, where can you get a net to go over the cone of thread? So when you're working with slippery threads, like monopoly or maybe a finer kind of thread, it has a tendency to kind of fall off the spool as you're quilting. And so if it falls, sometimes it can kind of get stuck under the cone and then you break your thread. Very frustrating. So a thread net kind of helps keep that thread close together. So like if you were to buy a cone of Monopoly thread, it actually comes with a thread net. But if you don't already have one, so I'm thinking like, that's a great question. Well, people already chimed in. Somebody said they get it from their local florist. Their local florist has them. I'm like, well, I didn't even know that. And then someone else said, Tracy said they buy them on Amazon just in yardage and cut it to size. So there you go. I will say when I have needed a thread net and couldn't find one, I cut the cuff off of an old sock and put it in its place, and it works too. So, I mean, you probably are better about matching your socks than I am, but I have a crap ton of unmatched socks, so I'm glad to use it for that. All right, Sally asked, what's my favorite tool? So this one was tricky because I was like, oh, I got a lot of favorite tools. You know, just like a quilter, it's like all the notions. My favorite unorthodox or not your normal kind of quilting tool would be my headphones. So Jeremy, my husband, got me some nice Beats headphones over the ear, super cushy, and I can just listen to my audiobooks or music and quilt until I have to go to sleep. So that's my favorite tool. My second favorite, and I just kind of grabbed this, and I just could only find the package, so it's not in there, but it's a thread pick. So it's like a mini, tiny crochet hook. And if you've ever made a quilt top that has like white background fabric and started quilting it, that's when you find out all those colorful threads that might be stuck in between the quilt sandwich. I use that puppy to kind of wiggle in there and pull them out, especially if you work with like thread or fabrics that ravel as you're piecing. So that's one of my favorite unorthodox ones. But that's, you know, it's funny about notions and tools that changes from time to time. All right, this was kind of a troubleshooting question from Elro. They're quilting white. When they're quilting, white shows up on the top, like kind of poking through white. And they said it's not the thread or the batting or the fabric. What could it be? And changing the needle does not help. So that was kind of tricky. It could be a couple different things. So unfortunately, I don't know exactly what it is. Sometimes if the needle is not sharp, it might tear through the batting as it's quilting instead of separating those fibers. And what it does is kind of pull some of them up with it. And so that could be what you're seeing. It could be just the hole from where your stitch is. So when those threads come together and make that perfect tensioned stitch, you have just like a tiny little dot. So maybe you're kind of seeing the light from underneath, especially they said they were working on a darker fabric. So it could be that. It could also be, I don't know if this is it or not, but sometimes when you're quilting, the quilt fabric kind of, unravels a little bit, and it kind of pulls a bit. So you could be seeing the fabric kind of pulling away. If you're quilting on a sewing machine, I know you said changing the needle didn't help. Usually that's kind of it. It's pulling or tearing. On a long arm, it could be, if you're on a long arm, you're holding maybe that quilt sandwich too tight on the frame. It's too taut, and that's what's kind of making it kind of pierce through there. So try loosening it and see if that helps. Sorry I couldn't help more with that. The great thing about quilting is most things are fixed with an easy solution. The bad thing is most things could be caused by 100 different things. So if you have a comment or an idea, leave it in the video, and so maybe that can help them. All right, Tressa also asked, could I show pictures of the backs of my quilts? And it's funny because Anna B is over here and we're like, oh, yeah, we never really show pictures of the backs. And so she made a note to maybe take some pictures of the backside. I will say though, when I pick out fabric for my quilt backs, I just grab the closest thing that's the appropriate size. Like I don't usually match my fabric or do anything like that. So one of my samples, I was thinking, I'm like, oh, it doesn't even match the quilt top. So when you do see the back sides of my quilts, don't judge, the fabric choice. And usually when I'm quilting, you can't really see the quilting a whole lot in the back anyway. But Anna said she'd get some pictures and we'll see. We'll do a whole like the other side of the quilt or something. Another question was, where do I get my inspiration? I love that question because I know when I look at people that do other stuff, no matter what it is, cook, any kind of creative endeavor, I'm always curious about what does that process look like? What are they inspired by? And I wish I had some deep, profound thing. Like I wish I could say, oh, I go out to the pond and I sit and I just no, that's not it. I will say, I believe that inspiration comes from the doing. So if I'm trying to decide how to design a fabric collection, I start designing the fabric collection, start designing it, getting into it, and then that's kind of where the ideas come from. I know that doesn't sound very cool, but that's kind of how that goes. I also, though, like out in the real world, I'm very always paying attention, like, oh, what colors are being used in advertisements? Maybe those colors might be popular. I'm always kind of looking at things. So being aware of what's going on, just kind of soaking in your environment and then just doing. I know, like, for instance, where do I get my inspiration for quilting designs? Like, how do I quilt the quilts that I'm quilting on? Sometimes when I can't decide, I just start with it, and then the ideas come. So I know that's not the best answer, but hey, I said you can ask any questions. I didn't say you'd get good answers, so there's that. Somebody asked, what size needle do you use, or what's the best size needle to use when quilting? Well, the best size needle to use is the needle that works with the size of thread that you're working with. So it's dependent on the thread. Threads have different weights, different thicknesses, and then the needle that you use needs to be appropriate for that thread. So checking with your thread manufacturer. I will say, for the most part, 16 and 18s on the long arm is what I use 100% of the time. So you don't have to get too crazy with it there. All right, couple more questions. Again, I really do appreciate you hanging out with me. I know sometimes answering lots of questions, I hope it's helpful. I like to tease my family. I say, people pay to listen to me talk, and you get the pleasure for free. So my kids don't seem to like that too much. Anyway, I appreciate that you're listening. All right, do I ever use a stitch regulator such as a Bernina BSR? So I kind of already alluded to this. I learned how to machine quilt without a stitch regulator, and so for me, I feel like it's almost kind of slows me down a bit. I will use a stitch regulator if I'm on the long arm if I'm doing a demo. So if I'm quilting and talking to people, it allows me to kind of pause and do that. But on my sewing machine and on my long arm as I'm quilting, I just do it in manual. But the thing I want to say, and this wasn't in the question, but the thing I want to say is everybody has their own settings. Like if I were to go get in your car, I'd have to kind of adjust the settings of it because you have that car set to you. And if a stitch regulator is where your happiness is, that's great. I love giving my opinion because I am the expert of my opinion, but I never want you to think, oh, that's the only way to do it, because that definitely is not the case. So hopefully that helps. Okay, somebody said, I'm having trouble positioning the quilt on my domestic machine to get a flat area amidst all the bulk. Any tips? So when you're quilting and you're doing the smush and push, you got the quilt over your shoulder, in the machine, over here, getting that flat area. One thing that will really help is getting an extended base, an extended table for your sewing machine. I would almost say it's like required. Not only does it keep the whole quilt level, but it gives you somewhere to put your hands. If I'm working on a smaller kind of area, I have to reposition my hands a lot. So if you're not using an extended base, could not recommend that enough. Now those are machine specific, so you'll want to check with your sewing machine manufacturer and get one that goes with that. That being said, you're going to have to reposition the quilt quite often, especially when you're in the center or in the middle of the quilt where it's the heaviest. So you just need enough to put your hands on each side and kind of quilt in this area. So you don't need the whole thing to be flat. But as you kind of get past your fingertips, you'll have to reposition the quilt. So it's just kind of the necessary part of quilting. So reposition often and keep your hands on either side of the needle because that's where you have your control. I know, especially even in my videos when I'm going, sometimes I'm quilting and my hands are creeping up because I don't want to pause, but I don't have any control. My hands are over there. So repositioning will help. Hopefully that helps. I will say that when you're quilting quilts, there's some parts that are a lot easier around the edges or the corners, and there are just some parts that are tricky, like the center, just because you have so much bulk around the whole thing. I like to save those areas for when I'm super fresh and I'm excited and gung-ho about the quilting. If it's late and I've had a glass of wine or four, maybe that's not what I'm going to do there. So kind of gauging all that. Can the wavy design be used in a wider repeat than as shown in the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, or will it look strange? So in the previous video series, we learned how to add movement to the background areas of our quilts, and I showed you how to quilt the wavy design. So for a picture of that or to see what I'm even talking about, you can check out that video. When I quilt things, I like to quilt them densely. That's just where my heart is. And so in the videos, and usually the quilts too, they're quilted pretty tight. Those lines are close together. But on any quilting design, you can spread them out. So yeah, you can take that wavy design and quilt the lines so they're further apart. I would say about 1/2 inch apart, 3/4 of an inch would be about as big as I'd want to do it. I mean, you can definitely go for that inch, bigger if you wanted, but kind of staying within that range. But yeah, you can definitely use it or quilt it on a bigger scale. And I think the more you work with the design, the more you kind of play around with that, the more you'll find what you like and what looks good to you. Because ultimately, that's the important thing, right? It's whatever you like and whatever you think looks good. It's kind of like when people ask, what color fabric should I use for the quilt top? And you're like, well, it depends on whatever you like. So, although I do get it, because sometimes you're like, I don't know what I like. But the more you do it, the more you'll get it. How should I start and stop a design that is not edge to edge on a domestic machine? So how do I start a new line of quilting and then in the middle of the quilt? Because when you're off to the edge, you can just kind of pull it off. I'm going to do a video for this. It's hard to explain, but I will kind of give you the basics of it. When I position the quilt where I want to start my line of quilting, if I just start quilting, I'm going to get a thread nest on the bottom because that bobbin thread is under there. It's not the end of the world. We can call it textured quilting or call it artistic or something, but if you don't want that, what I like to do is pull the bobbin thread up to the top. So to do that, I'll hold the top thread and I'll take a stitch down and up, and it kind of grabs that thread to the top. And then from there, I take a few stitches in place to secure it and then get to quilting. Now, if you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, I'm going to do a video. It was just somebody had asked before. I'm like, I'm going to try to get that out this week. So that is kind of how I do it. And that was kind of tacked on to another question that somebody asked. When I start that line of quilting, do I just take a couple stitches in place, or do I kind of jump back and forth? I just kind of take a few stitches in place to secure it. And that's how I handle it. So that's how you do it. And then when you tie off or stop the line of quilting, I do the same kind of in reverse. Take a few stitches in place, bring the bobbin thread up, and then cut it. That way it's all on the top. And this is important for those of you that quilt on a long arm. You should never have to go under your quilt or under your machine to cut your thread. Always pulling it up to the top will help you handle it there without, fussing with the underside of the quilt. But like I said, I'll do a video for that if that makes some kind of sense. And again, there's different ways to do everything in quilting, and if there's a different way that you do it that works for you, then stick with it. Definitely don't change it based on my preferences. That's just kind of how I like to do it. All right, and then the last question, and then I will let you all go for the rest of the week, and I'll see you in the next live chat. Do I have a video showing how to quilt traditional block quilts? The current problem is a barn-raising set of log cabin type blocks. So do I have a video that shows some of those? I actually do. I have the Help How Do I Quilt It Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. It's on my YouTube channel. And in it, I talk about square blocks. Now, I do want to do like videos that are more specific to like log cabin blocks and different styles. And so it's on the list of things to do. So I will say, like, trying to pick the designs out for it. When I'm looking at the quilt, I kind of try to think, what do I want to highlight with the quilting and what do I want to hide? And I kind of use that as my guide for what to quilt. With log cabin blocks, it depends so much on the fabric placement. Sometimes the log cabin blocks are just two different colors of fabric, right? Two sides. And in that instance, I might just do a filler on one side and a filler on the other. But sometimes they come together to make a bigger pattern. Sometimes they have different fabrics or different sizes. And so that's going to definitely change that. And as I was talking, I just realized I do have a Help How Do I Quilt It more recent Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along where I did specifically talk about log cabins. So check that out. We were kind of going through the channel, and there's a lot of videos, a lot of tutorials I've done over the years. So sometimes I forget it. So check that out. But I will say, when you get started on your quilt, sometimes what's a fun challenge is to try to force yourself to pick a different design for each block. And then when you're done, you'll have a beautifully quilted quilt, and then maybe even some design inspiration for future quilts. So sometimes we're not up for that challenge, right? Sometimes we're like, no, I just want to do it all over and then get this thing done. So that's totally fine too. Well, I do appreciate you hanging out with me for half an hour talking about quilting. I love getting to connect with everybody. Again, this was just kind of a relaxed Ask Me Anything session, but next week I'll either have a fun announcement or we'll talk about quilting design ideas for sampler quilts, such as the Build a Quilt block of the month that we have coming up. So definitely going to be some design inspiration there. I hope you all have a safe rest of your week, and I will see you next Thursday. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.